slide.
Yes, sure.
Ayushi?
Yes, sir.
Please.
Can you hear me properly?
Yes.
Hello, everyone. So it is my privilege to introduce Professor Akua Britwum, and who is a distinguished scholar and practitioner in the field of gender, labor, and development. Professor Britwum is a senior research fellow at the Institute for Development Studies at the University of Cape Coast, Ghana. She holds a PhD in Union Governance and Globalization from the University of Maastricht in Netherlands. And she teaches gender and development in the Development Management Program at the University of Cape Coast. Her career has spanned both academia and trade union movements. She has served as a guest lecturer at the International Center for Decent Work and Development at the University of Kassel in Germany, and is an associate fellow of the Global Labor University. She has worked extensively with trade union organizations across Africa, including the leading African Workers Development Program, where she coordinated education and training for democratic worker participation. Professor Britwum has also contributed significantly to collaborative multi-country research, including an 11-country study on gender and trade union leadership. Her work covers critical issues such as sexual harassment and gender mainstreaming in universities, trade union, internal democracy, gender, and the informal economy, and the labor history in Africa. She has published widely on the gender-based violence, Women Traders Association, and governance in trade unions. In addition to her academics and research contributions, she is currently serving as the first woman chairperson of Ghana's National Media Commission, a remarkable achievement. So please join me in in this warm welcome and to welcome Mr. Akua Britwum. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ayushi. Thank you for the kind words you said about me and my work. I also like to express my gratitude to our guest, and his colleague, and to say that for me it's always an honor and pleasure to share my work with an audience that is not really directly connected to the spaces that I work, but because then it gives me the opportunity to also bounce back and listen. Let me apologize also that I find myself in a space where the lighting is not quite good, so please bear with me. My task, I'm sharing screen shortly. My task is to share some of the reflections on the work that I have done with trade unions in the informal economy. Let me also confess that I've had the opportunity to work with Blue scholars in India, and so I might, in my presentation, make references to that. And one scholar is Professor Sharif Gomez, who passed even before we could publish this work. And I would like to mention him and remember him also in terms of how warm he was when we visited India, and also how he deepened our understanding of informality in the world of work. So today, as I said, I'm sharing my experiences of informality in Ghana. I'll situate it in the current trends that are shaping work and working conditions, and what implications it presents for informal workers' representation in Ghana. Some of the issues directing the tax really global existential crisis and technological advancement, and the implications they have in terms of the Ghana case that I've been following for a while. Yeah, so to do this, I just want us to step back a bit because when you listen to the news, you go online, the issues that are coming up are the multitude of crises and how the crises are layered. And the fact that these crises in the past, when they were spaced, now they appear to be occurring almost simultaneously and more frequently, but they all have implications for work and labor. So politically motivated conflict and the threat of the World War, the Israeli genocide, and the complete abandonment of any standards in terms of respect for humanity and what is going on in Gaza. There's a Russian-Ukrainian war, and the new threats also in terms of facing China. There are others, of course, not to remind you of just your immediate past also, this altercation between India and Pakistan, and how all these politically motivated conflicts normally are not situated in the political exigencies of the countries, but mostly externally generated. Then there are the economic tensions and the US sanctions and tariff wars. I don't need to go on. But then more importantly also is a debt crisis and the policies, debt management policies everywhere, different continents with different dynamics and what it means. Then, but in all this also is the increasing loss of confidence in liberal pluralism and Western leadership. So we find ourselves really almost at the global level, bereft of political leadership and a voice. It's within this context that the emergence of BRICS and its challenge to unipolarity for some of us gets exciting. But what alternative does it present? Of course, this falls outside the discussion that I'm presenting. But for me, in terms of the work that I've done, I've been very conscious of the fact that in all these crises, it is workers that pick up the cost. I mean, one clear example is the COVID crisis. It was a health crisis, but workers were the ones that are affected, work that are disrupted. When you talk about war, you talk about sanctions and all that. So workers are the ones that pick up the cost. And how do they pick up the cost? And in terms of how they pick up the cost, has direct implications for work forms and work informality. So I would also like very quickly also to just situate the debate on technology, which is also shaping the world of work. So very briefly, just remind ourselves that in terms of the technological ways and how they've made dramatic impact on work and how people work. So the very first one that is called the mechanical revolution, that's tended to reduce drudgery powered by steam and water. The second one, which really pushed further mass production that was embedded in the mechanical revolution, but powered by electricity and fossil fuel. So leading more and more to the assembly line production and a concentration of workers in one area, in one space, but also accompanied with more sophisticated skills and division of labor. Then we have the third, which is a digital revolution, issues of electronics, internet automation, and digitization, but which also allowed the fueling of relocation of industries. And so, and in fact, even the dismembering of industries, so that it was no longer necessary to concentrate the production of a particular good in one space. It can be spread all over the world. In the past, we used to talk about the fourth industrial revolution, which is powered by the artificial intelligence. So that more and more, the whole thing about virtual forms that are assisting and taking over even human reflection in production. So not just the physical exertion, but also the mental exertion in production. So we are told that we are at the fifth level because there's a lot of concern about what is driving artificial intelligence and the fear that humanity might lose control over artificial intelligence. So there's a talk about getting it to be more human-centered and directed towards human well-being. For me, this fifth discussion fits into some of the issues of informality that I'll be raising. So now one would like to then look at the whole debate. So what's powering the debate about the industrial revolutions and what it means for humanity and all that. And the discourses are divergent. People are excited about its potential beneficial impact. But then, because then the whole point is that the technology is still redefining work and work relations. So at every point in time, how people work, where they work, the conditions under which they work, and their working relations are embedded in the technological changes. And for us, at the current point, really, as I've already mentioned, the wholesale relocation of industries and expansion in global supply chains so that there's more interconnectedness globally in terms of supply chains. So no country is independent in terms of how it produces. So there's a division of labor has also been associated across the globe. So you find that for a particular product, the labor force producing it is spread across the globe within countries and even within countries as well. But what's important is the new forms of work that are coming, the platform economy and the app-mediated work. And so people are sounding the potential threat, which I alluded to earlier. The whole point is the intensification of global capitalist exploitative devices. So that embedded in these new forms of work is the capacity to push for reduction in labor standards and the principles and instruments that have been used to protect labor. So and at another level also is the fact that jobs are being dislocated, jobs are disappearing, and increasing poverty and inequalities that are working. So workers' ability to hold capital accountable is reducing, and this is where informality is situated. Of course, I'm also interested in the gender threats, and some of the work that I have done also has pointed more and more to the fact that where women congregate and where women find work and where women find work that responds more to their gendered burdens they bring to the labor market, like care work, it's also disappearing. At one level also, people are saying that it tends to disappear in the public space, but it's also appearing in ways in which platform work is allowing flexible work so that women can stay at home and work. But when there's very little separation between home and work also, it tends to also expand women's burdens. The other point also is opportunities for STEM-related skills that women can pick up. So what is being said is that the inherent benefits of drivers of technological advancement really rests on who the key drivers are and what their priority. So who is driving technological advancement and what is their priority? So, and the national orientation that is framing the position and attitude to issues like investments in physical and social infrastructure and individual capacities. So what about the countries? What is the level of physical infrastructure especially physical infrastructure that supports technological uptake. And the social infrastructure is talking about skills and the kinds of social wages that workers have and can fall back on, and how much is invested in individual capacities in terms of education and training and skills uptake. Then there's also the hard infrastructure for housing, for transport, and how people can be connected, and also the whole thing about the soft infrastructure also. What systems are there for childcare? What systems are there for aged care? What systems are there for health? And the whole point also about going green, because one of the crises we are facing is also the global warming. And levels of automation and digitization that the country has. I'll talk more about it. But then we go back to the key drivers. What are the economic drivers? Which areas are jobs being created? And which areas have the largest job labor absorption capacities? Okay. So that for us in Africa and in Ghana, what this suggests is that our ability to fully utilize our human resource potential, because one of the benefits that is pointed out to us in Africa is the fact that since we in Africa have a young population, our labor force is predicted to increase by 66%. And these are figures I got 2 years ago, in 15 years. Whereas in other places, especially in the West, and when you talk about the global West, you also include Japan, there's a declining population. So Africa then is seen as holding the future labor force. What does it mean? How can we benefit? But the benefits that we have also is constrained by the skill base of our labor force, the ability to offer high-end industry skills. And this is also connected to the fact that even though currently we are producing more and more students from higher education institutions, there's no guarantee of their skill base. 2 reasons. One is the fact that there's so much massification of higher education in Africa that quality is being threatened. So everybody is going to university. So the student numbers are increasing, but facilities for teaching and teaching staff is not increasing to correspond to it. And then there's a whole point also at what kinds of jobs are being created and how African universities can predict jobs of the future and use it as a basis for the education and training policies. But it's not because for want of not trying, but it's precisely because of the fact that the drivers, there's a disconnect between the drivers of technology and African universities. There's a lot of talk about working with industry and all that. But then if we take the fact that we are working with multinational corporations most of the time, whose research and development is located in their home countries, then the whole point about trying and what kinds of policies we have also come there. So if you go back to this whole thing about infrastructure, then we also find the whole thing about technological penetration and uptake. So where is the infrastructure that gives access? And when the infrastructure gives access, you have the mass, you can access internet. What about individuals and their ability to get the necessary tools that allow them to make use of these technological advancements for their personal benefit, but also for their work as well. So in this context, let me just briefly talk about informality and work and where I'm coming from. So when I talk about work informality, what do I mean? And I rest my discussion on this whole thing about its conceptual origins. And for me, it's important that we remember that even though the work forms had existed, it took the pioneering work of Keith Hart, who is an anthropologist and Singer and Jolly team economist. Keith Hart working in Ghana, and the Singer and Jolly team in Kenya. And their findings really and how it subverted mainstream, not just academic discourse, but even policy discourse also on the national economies in the global south. And that when what is considered to be the economy, to all intents and purposes, you're using the standard indicators, should have collapsed. The people were still surviving and could still make ends meet. And this was thanks to the informal sector. So the need for accurate information to inform policy became obvious, because what was considered the drivers of the national economy, it became very clear that policymakers and academics were not getting it right. So fast track to the work on the discussions, and currently we moved from trying to understand the informal sector, enterprises, and how they operated, more with own account workers that trying to produce a workable surplus, which is the informal sector, to the informal employment, looking more and more at formal sector employees whose working conditions and work relations reflected more and more informal sector work. So now we talk more and more about the informal economy, where in this sense we are talking about informal employment, all kinds of employment, whether be it in the formal, be it in the household, work of a certain nature. So the idea really is that we focus more on working conditions and not where people work, because where people work does not necessarily guarantee formal sector employment. So here, informal employment, whether it's within or outside the informal sector. So here, it can be in the formal sector or based in the household. And this categorization really is based on the International Conference of Labor Statisticians. And I know the Delhi group plays an important role in also keeping up and ensuring that these concepts and the capture and the measurement of informal workforce is accurate as well. So more or less talking about work that is performed for others, either in exchange for pay or for profit. They tend to exclude own use and subsistence production. And for some of us, we believe that this has to be closely looked at, because otherwise these are ways in which women as workers can be messed here. So here, the whole thing is job status, which is tied to the characteristics of the employment, and not what you call it, the characteristics of the employment and the status of the worker in the regulatory environment. So what are the regulatory instruments and institutions for workers? Now, if we have working conditions that escape this regulatory environment, it doesn't matter where the worker is situated, that worker becomes an informal. So what does this mean for us in Ghana? This for us, this is how in Ghana we capture informal work, which is saying that predominantly small to medium scale businesses consisting of producers, wholesale, retail traders, service providers that are made up of contributing family workers, casual wage workers, home-based workers, street vendors, among others. And it says that most of these that are likely self-employed persons, farmers, artisans, craft workers, traders, and processors. Now it adds that whereas the definition of informal sector depends on the characteristics of the enterprise in which the person works, the determination of whether a person is in informal employment or not depends on the characteristics of the person's job. And so here, it means then that informal employment really, it's not restricted to the informal sector, but it is within the formal sector. And it is within this dynamics also that I want us to look at the new jobs that are emerging and how they come. So briefly, I would like us to take a look at informal labor market, the global labor market and informal. And we can see using the work-based definition that work informality is a global phenomenon. So in other spaces, it's less than 20%, but these are statistics from 2023. It's difficult to find others, but clearly we know that it is bound to change. But this is just to tell us, and we can see how for us in Ghana, well, we belong to the 50 to 75% range, but no, 75 to 89% range. Yeah. Okay, and others who are 90% or higher. Okay, but 79 is also close to 90%. So it means that every 100 persons who are working, 11 is only 11 of them who are formally employed. Yeah, and so these are more statistics showing us the first one showing at the global level how many people are employers, how many people are own account workers, and how many what proportion are contributing family workers. Now, it's important for us to remember that the fact that you are an employee does not necessarily mean that you are a formal sector. So we can see high income, middle income, low income, and the global stuff. What does it mean for us in Ghana? In Ghana, this is the statistics that we have in terms of everybody. The latest, what you call it, the latest statistics that we can fall on is telling us that it's about 71% who are in the formal sector, and then 12% in the private formal, and then 9-point-something% in the public, semi-public. Now, we need to remember that being in the formal, whether private or public, does not necessarily mean that you are in a formal employment. And we can see that the numbers are larger for women in the informal sector than it is for men. Yeah. Then when we look at employment status, then this comes back to the whole issue about the point about employment status, which is used to define informal workers. So you can see that 80% of workers, right, are in employment relations that are not formal, self-employed, contributing family workers, and 20% in wage employment. And within this wage employment also, we can see that we have informal workers. Yeah. So what are the issues here? How have informal workers organized to promote their interests? And research has shown for us in Ghana that really they have a high disposition to organize, and they always try to organize. The issues pushing them to organize is more for self-help, and they're around welfare issues, and they use that to build informal social protection, access to credit, supporting each other in times of ill health, in times of loss of capital. Some of the transport owners, they are groups. They have a system where the self-employed drivers, when they lose their vehicle, they have a system where they keep them and they give them what they call chop money. That's interesting. And then they also use that to regulate their operations in order to instill discipline for consumer confidence and supplier also, because a number of them at the lower end are doing credit sales. So they get the goods on credit, and then after they sold the thing. So when they belong to a group and they have an identifiable leader, then the retailers are comfortable in working with them. Later on, they've used their groups to access credit, space, and inputs. Even in terms of equipment and raw materials, and to engage state institutions, especially around harassment. So we have the municipal, metropolitan, municipal, and district assemblies, and local government institutions, and harassment about space and levies. So even though there's a whole talk about the fact that they are not paying taxes, they are paying numerous levies. And because this is how the local government authorities have raised income outside the state allocation. And they've used that also to reverse negative policies. The introduction of taxes that they felt that was Hello.
Oh no.
Yeah. Is there a question I need to answer?
No, ma'am. I think somebody has forgotten to mute. I'll just check.
Okay. Okay, so I can go on.
Yes, ma'am. Please.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So they've used their self-organized associations to engage policy. But then, and sometimes even when policies have been advanced, they've asked that they be part of the process of implementing policies as well. So as a result, research is showing a lot of organizational forms that they have developed, and the self-organizing, as I said, some are really just welfare associations, some are regulatory, some are to access resources, and some are for policy engagement. But increasingly, you're finding out that they move from welfare associations to regulation to resource access and then policy engagement. And they've used this when they've hit a block in terms of policy engagement, then they've had to fall on traditional trade unions to help them with policy engagement and with varying levels of success. And now there are also NGOs that they're using. But so let's look at some of the organizational actors that have emerged. So the self-initiatives, the trade unions, and you find our research is showing that even international trade associations like the ITUC, for example, is beginning to support trade unions in Africa to move into the informal sector and organize informal workers. And the Global Labour Federation, we are talking about the PSI, Public Services International, industrial, all these are providing support to their partners in Africa to organize informal workers. And the national centers also. So in Ghana is a Ghana Trade Union Conference that and its national unions. I'll mention a few as we go on. But in all this also, there have been new actors because At the global level also, we are getting more and more international NGOs that are seeking to protect informal workers. We have WIGO, we have SIWA. Of course, in India, you are more familiar with SIWA and StreetNet, but faith-based organization. And it's not just in Ghana also, because then there's a PhD that I supervised at a certain point. I was looking at domestic workers in Indonesia, and discovering how faith-based organizations became very critical at a certain point also. Yeah, in supporting the interests of the informal workers. Then there are corporate interests, so within the privatized system, the formal enterprises, the private enterprises, when there's competition in their work, and in Ghana, we discovered this amongst waste workers. So waste collection has been totally privatized. But then there are certain low-income areas where these bigger waste corporations cannot access because of the nature of the equipment. And informal workers are doing that. And so the point was to organize them and use them to access these low-income areas and then benefit from them. And it has its own interesting dynamics. Then we find political parties also. Actually, when the associations, in terms of, it's been two things. One, from the side of the informal sector associations, but the other also has just been political capture. So during elections, parliamentarians who are standing for elections really want to work with established groups. And these established groups also realize that politicians will listen to them better and they can get their needs met when politicians need their vote. So it's been opportunistic on their part, but sometimes the informal sector associations have suffered for this, because then if you align yourself too much with a political party, and that's not a political party that wins, then there are issues, and how they build credibility and stand becomes something else. Yeah. So in terms of, there's been a debate, because looking at trade unions, really, are trade unions, what is the ideal mode for interest representation for informal economy? Yes. And so some of the existing debates contradictory, saying that who is best, what is the best form, and all that. And there's one of the work we did on informal organizing informal workers in South Africa and in India, looked at the various modes, and the research really was not conclusive, because some modes worked for others and some didn't. So the whole question really is the trade union role and its suitability for representing informal workers. Because if trade unions are the known mode for representing workers, then do we need to build a new one? Do we use trade unions? And these were some of the issues that I've been exploring. Yeah. So really the doubt is about if union structures are viable for representing informal workers. And some are saying that informal workers are really rejecting unions, and others supporting, and that's our work really. The Webster et al. Our findings in terms of these three country comparison showed that trade unions were playing a dominant role in organizing informal workers. Dominant role, really. But the challenge is how the trade union movement in itself is amenable for organizing informal workers. So really, what should we be talking about? An alternative movement? Should we be depending on non-traditional actors, some of which I've mentioned? And the conclusion really is that the organizational choices really depend on the environment and the specific issues that is confronting informal workers. And we've noticed how how much informal workers also can take advantage of the situation and align themselves with different actors to meet their needs, and sometimes just move on when they've solved their needs and decide that the association with this actor is detrimental to their needs as well. So what has been some of my findings in terms of the work that I've done, the experience of the Trade Union Congress of Ghana? So here, in fact, the Trade Union Congress Ghana was formed in 1945. In fact, it's 80 years this year. But then as early as 1967, the Ghana Private Road Transport Union joined the TUC, and the Ghana Private Road Transport Union is wholly informal. It's made up of owner drivers and driver employees, so individuals who own their transport. And most of the time it's just one person owning one vehicle. But that's a public means of transport. And now we have a number of associations. But in 1967, they were the ones. And it became important because they had formed the association and they were meeting a lot of challenges. So they came to the TUC and affiliated with the TUC, and that opened the policy space, gave them more visibility and legibility as well. In 1979, the General Agricultural Workers Union started organizing rural self-employed. And this was in response to the ILO Convention on Organizing Rural Workers. And in 1990, the Hairdressers and Beauticians Association. So Hairdressers and Beauticians Association, these are also, what do you call it, self-employed with employers and all that, but mainly informal. They joined the ICU. ICU is an Industrial and Commercial Workers Union, which is a national union, which at that time was affiliated to the Trade Union Congress of Ghana. In 1992, it was at that time that the Trade Union Congress, at its Delegates Congress, decided on the need to organize informal workers to address membership loss, because in 1992, then structural adjustment and privatization and retrenchment had peaked, and most of the unions had lost between 25% and for some almost 65% of their workforce. And most of them had either moved into informal employment or into the informal sector. So, and in 1996, at the next Congress, it set up its policy, and in 2000, it set up a DEX to assist its national unions to organize the informal economy. Because so how do you organize? So how do you deal with it? What are the issues? And there were a number of issues. I see around that same time also, other, what do you call it, informal economy associations have also been coming to the TUC to seek affiliation. So it was a convergence of the trade union seeking to organize their members who have been displaced into the informal sector. And the informal workers also recognizing the need for employment, the need for better and stronger representation. So in 2013, there are a number of informal economy associations that had independently sought affiliation with the TUC. There are so many of them. So the TUC decided on the need to form a council of informal workers association. So they were associate members. But in 2015, there was a 19th affiliate of the TUC, which was called UNIWA. And then it was 18,000. But as at the time I was doing my research in 2022, they reported having 125,000 members. So what is UNIWA? But even before I go to UNIWA to give you a sense of the membership and all that, let's look at the geographical spread. In terms of informal economy associations that have the widest national base, so you find them everywhere in this country, in the regions, even in townships. is a GPRTU, that's the oldest. And to a certain extent, GAWU, Organizing Rural Agricultural Workers. And the Industrial and Commercial Workers Union, that's also organizing beauticians. Then you have the Timber and Woodworkers Union, Public Services Workers Union, Local Government Union, and then UNIWA. These are the unions that have a large national spread. But the rest are mainly based in the capital here in Accra. And despite the fact that the female, there's a higher proportion of female labor force within the informal sector, you find out that most of the areas that the unions were organizing were focused more on the male-dominated areas. It's just a section of UNIWA that had actually brought in more females, which is about 86,000. But the TUC contests this because the TUC is saying that when you ask for UNIWA membership, because it's related to dues, UNIWA presents lower numbers. But UNIWA also explains and says that most of the members are affiliated to UNIWA, not as individual members, but as associational members. Okay. So these are some of the associations. Choba really is street cooking, aluminium fabricators. So these are working with aluminium metals and all that. Traders, actors, porters. Porters are people who carry goods within the city. They either carry it on their head or they use push carts. Then you have the physically disabled and still more traders, tomatoes, musician unions, artisans, traders. So that you can see Odona traders. So the traders are more spatially based, so connected to a space. Then the professional glazers, StreetNet Ghana. So StreetNet organizes street vendors, and the street vendors are members of UNIWA. Still markets, Tema, Afia Kobi. Then there's a domestic workers union, still street food cookers, shop owners, caterers, traders, spare parts sellers. WACAM really is an NGO. WACAM stands for, originally stood for Community Affected Mining. You know, so these are communities that are, they said, are on the wrong side of mining. And WACAM is an advocacy NGO that actually supports them in dealing with excesses. So these are the large mines dealing with excesses and then negotiating, in fact, even takeover of land and then negotiating compensation. So these are the groups that you have. So this raises questions because they are so diverse in terms of their needs and all that. And when I was doing the research, there was a bit of disquiet about how the UNIWA can really, as one union, can serve their interests. So there was talk about the need to break down and form more industrial based informal sector unions affiliated with the TUC. But I'll pick some of the issues when I go. So what have been some of the tensions for unions as they organize? What have been some of the tensions? And I use this, what do you call it? This concept that came out. And it captures all the barriers to organizing as despondent factors. Yeah. Now, so I'll look at despondent factors in relation to those that stop unions from organizing, those that discourage unions from organizing. Those are challenges that unions need to overcome when they organize informal workers. So the first one is the unions themselves, their capacity to organize and their skills to organize. And Yeah. The skills they have also to organize. And most of the time, it's related to how dispersed the informal sector operators are. So they are all over, which really is a deviation from what unions are. You go to one workplace, it's situated in a place, and then you can organize. But these are dispersed. And sometimes, by the time the organizational even when they've organized them, sometimes they come back and find out that the enterprises had collapsed. So which comes to the cost and returns to unions, because unions were moving to organize informal workers because they were losing members and they were losing subscription. So there is this whole thing about how much is invested and how much is received when they organize, because their incomes are low and it's not possible to get them to pay their regular rates. So most of the time they are just paying associational rates. And the employment status also becomes an issue, because sometimes there's no identifiable employer, but sometimes also within the association, you have more of the dominance of the owner, the self-employed, who are seeking affiliation, and the self-employed seeking affiliation without their employee. So we can talk about the transport union, for example, and most of the time it's the owner drivers that are there that dominate, and their driver employees and their space within the union, it becomes difficult to deal with as well. And what kinds of labor legislation they can use to cover them, that becomes a problem. And the trade union registration procedure, and a number of times, as I mentioned earlier, by the time, because the procedure and the certificates and verification, and most of the time, by the time they are done, the work is over. And this happens more even within the construction industries. Then the NGO and foreign donor syndrome. Most of the time, the unions have been pushed there because they have a bit of funding, and how they proceed in terms of organizing. And once they organize, and there's a bit of workshops in hotels and where they are fed, and they're giving them transport allowance and all that. Then they also service provision, training, skills training, and inputs. Then once it's done after 2-3 years, they move from service beneficiaries to become members. And the trade unions are asking that you need to pay dues. And the informal sector operators are not convinced that they should pay dues, because they believe that foreign donors are giving them support. So most of the time, even when they move to other areas, there's all these expectations that it's donor sponsored, and so they seek more for what it is that the unions will bring them in, and all that. And then we talk about politicians and how they also capture. So unions have organized, and then when foreign donor support ceases, or during the election era, they go and find out that the group they've organized is more associated with one political party. And of course, the unions will have to pull back, because when there's that definite association with a political party color, they cannot work with the association anymore. Yeah. But in some places also, the informal workers have shown a lot of skepticism, especially formal sector workers who have been displaced, where they've had very bad relations with their unions around the retrenchment and several awards, and they've had reason to suspect their leaders as well. Yeah. Then there's also the whole way in which, because of the service provisioning, how the informal associations can stand and defend their rights. So it's then the commitment of unions to their informal economy members, and then the union's ability to understand the internal dynamics of the informal workers. So what occasions, and this is what one had been exploring, what occasions do they allow informal workers to test their own political capacity? Because you remember, one has said earlier, they have been forming associations in order to engage policy. Now, you find out that with the setup of the desk, is the desk officer who is doing all these policy engagement. And sometimes they felt almost like being played down. So, and then when unions also, instead of leading them to engage with policymakers, when they do the direct service provisioning because of donor support, that also then gets Informal Economy Workers Association to believe that, well, there's some NGO that should bring you these services. And you don't need to develop your own capacity to engage government and get your needs met. So how the other thing also is the formal sector workers' needs and the informal members' needs. And sometimes you find out that the formal sector members of the union, so where the unions are made up of a mix of formal sector members and informal sector members, you find out that there's the way in which the formal sector members feel that the union space belongs to them, and that the informal sector workers are coming to take there. So you find a revision to union constitution to make it difficult for informal sector members to hold office, vote for, stand for office, be elected, and be part of union decision making. So you find that informal economy members, normally, if you ask them, so what shows that you're a union member? They say, oh, when they have national parade, May Day parades, we are there, we get t-shirts, or they invite us for seminars, and that's about it. So the whole thing also is that most of the time, unions are focused more on collective bargaining with employers, and they tend to miss the whole thing about what kinds of engagement they can use to represent informal economy workers. And then, of course, there's a whole thing about funding. So if you've been providing services and funding disappears, what do you do? But despite all this, there are still factors that support organizing, and this has been termed the axis of commonality. So what are the common interests that allow unions to organize informal workers? And one of it really on the part of the unions is that your members are moving into the informal economy, they are becoming informal workers. So you're losing members. So what do? So they follow some of their members to bring them and organize them. And in fact, some of the members who have had better union experience also have actually gone back to their unions for coverage as well. So informal economy workers also have been seen as strengthening unions' political power. In fact, union clout. And donor funding, of course, I've mentioned that. But on the part of informal workers, it's been the representation, the recognition, and the awareness of their own rights and their bargaining power, and that they need not stand alone, and that they can be part of trade unions, and trade unions can do a better recognition for them. And they've also mentioned that when they have joined unions with their associations, they've seen that group cohesion and issues around internal democracy have improved, because there were ways in which the earlier leaders somehow will hold on to office, and it becomes difficult to move them off. But one of the things is that they have to meet is that they have constitution, and that leadership has to be elected and can't change. But they also celebrate the fact that they have office space and they have free meeting spaces. So they can go to the hall of trade unions and can meet, and the hall of trade unions also, they have an office as well. But it is what it does to their bargaining power when they are bargaining with local authorities. And the fact that they say that, look, we go, and then as soon as they see our letterhead and they see of TUC Ghana, then their attitude change, and they want to sit down and they want to listen to us as well. Some have also have been able to get title deeds to the sites where they operate, and in terms of resources and entrepreneurial skills, training, inputs, and access to business contacts. This is something that they mention as well. But for some of them also is the international recognition and the travel exposure. So these are street food vendors, and talking about the number of fairs they've traveled around the globe to be part of, because they are part of unions as well. But there are issues of representation that's coming out in terms of work of the future. So the whole point, something that hasn't come out too well also, is the new forms of work that are coming in terms of the informal sector operators. And one that we have been following is a ride-hailing workers who are trying to seek affiliation with the unions, with different levels of frustration and successes as well. So for us, in terms of our research, we see that the stimulus of informality, especially job work informality in the formal sector, is driven more by the future of work. So the work forms that are coming, they all to all intents and purposes are informal in nature: triangular employment, no direct employee, and then no question about social protection, because then you get a contract and you take care of everything. So the whole point that we want to raise is that all these stimulants of informality within the work of the future, who is benefiting? Who are the beneficiaries of workers, informal workers? What does it mean for our national and international economic policies? And the national policies to create jobs and social wages. How do we situate some of these debates there? And what about corporate decisions to reduce production costs? And this has been interesting for us, because some of especially amongst plantation workers, we have discovered that in some of the plantations, worker retrenchment accompanies expansion in production. So because you would think that when they get equipment and they want to expand production, they would employ more workers. No, but they rather retrench workers and encourage them to be outgrowers or smallholders, moving them into the informality. So we are asking that unions also keep an eye on some of these things as well, because embedded in this also is deindustrialization as a enterprises fragment, and which deindustrialization then suggests that if we are not conscious, work on the future, which allows a global relocation of different production, the global, what do you call it, the supply chain, and different location, and not the concentration in one space, also can mean deindustrialization for different parts of the world as enterprises fragment globally as well, creating more and more triangular work, flexible, casual, outsourcing, subcontracting, and all that. So this really, for me, calls for a reconceptualization of union function, that unions will have to rethink what is collective bargaining, because collective bargaining cannot be an exercise between a labor and employer where there's no identifiable employer. And then the fact that we cannot talk about a fixed place of work. So people are sitting in their homes and they are working, but then they are working for an employer who is located on the other side of the globe as well. And if you're talking about artisans who work where the work is based, so we are talking about construction. So this whole definition of our workplace will have to be considered by unions. So this calls for an expansion of the operational terrain, because it will call for how you connect the workplace to the community to the national. Because a number of the informal sector operators also, it is the engagement with the local government in terms of how infrastructure is provided and what does it mean and how does it allow access to markets, access to technology. So national policies also become important. So when we are talking about the local government, what's the levies, the infrastructure, what does it take into recognition when it's providing infrastructure? Does it recognize that most of the people within the community are traders? And so what kinds of roads do you build and what kinds of markets do you build and what provisions do you make of all that? So national legislations and national policies are important. And international trade deals also, one should add here also, for us, African Free Continental Trade Agreement, really very critical as well. And then unions also and how they can connect with other actors, NGOs, faith-based organizations, and international associations. But then also what this calls for is that unions have to be conscious of the entire global space and the crisis and accompanying technologies and how these changes work, so that unions can then be more proactive and expand their operational terrain and deal more with workers as well. So these are some sources that could be of interest where I, together with colleagues, we've looked at issues around informality and all that. Yeah. So thank you all. If there are questions, if there are clarifications, and there are comments and there are concerns. Thank you. I'm done.
Thanks a lot, madam. I mean, it was extremely thought-provoking. I'm sure there will be some questions or comments. Now the floor is open for questions and comments. I have some, but I will ask later maybe.
Thank you.
Okay, since nobody is asking, let me start. Minaketan ji, can you mute it because it is echoing? So, me and Minaketan ji, we are sitting just in front of Madam's office at the University of Cape Coast, but Madam is in Accra at the capital of Ghana. But yeah, so ma'am, yes, after coming here, we realized that we know so little about Africa, but at the same time, we have realized that there are so much similarities. And particularly after your talk, I mean, in Indian context, the situation is, to my understanding, is almost the same. In manufacturing, we also have 92% of our labor workforce is in informal sector. The entire agriculture is informal. Most part of the service sector is informal. Construction workers are in informal sector. So it is basically, I guess, more than 90% of our total workforce is basically in informal sector, where there is hardly any social security, where there is any protection, hardly any protection. And in most of the cases, their earning is less than the minimum wage norm set by the government. So they hardly have any collective bargaining power, uh, lack of union. All those things are quite common. However, my question is that in such a context, in a context of such an economy, uh, we know that bargaining is important, but as you are saying, for example, in case of gig workers, we don't know who is the employer, or even if there is some employer, maybe across the globe or maybe somewhere else. I mean, we don't know whom to fight with. Secondly, for example, more than 50% of our workers in India are self-employed or own account workers. So even if they are unionized, what would they bargain for, or vis-a-vis whom? So if they are self-employed, then I mean, their bargaining has to be very different from the bargaining where some employer-employee relationship exists. So what is your take on these things? I mean, these are complex, complicated questions, I know, but at the same time, you are the best person to respond. That's why I thought I'll ask them. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for the question. Yeah. So which is so if you remember, then as I was concluding, I was saying that unions have to reconceptualize their what they mean by bargaining, and you find out that most of the time it's about national policy. It is about a particular law. It is a legislation. So national policy, and then it's also about national trade agreements, for example, So I remember recently in India, and I was just thinking, when Trump announced the tariffs and asking that India open up its market to its dairy market. You remember the farmers, very clear and all that. So here, what we are talking about for the farmers is not an employer, they are self-employed, but what policies, what trade agreement is the government going to enter into, and what does it mean? And in fact, tariff regimes are one of them. The African Free Continental Trade Union, the traders are saying that, look, here are African countries. They are talking about a trade agreement, and they are talking as if it doesn't exist. And they're saying the African countries should trade amongst themselves. We are not trading. But you go to the markets, and they're already trading, and there's a lot of informal cross-border trade. But how does it sit within this? So what we are saying is that unions then have to understand that if there's this policy, the policy is that how does it affect workers? So someone has said that, I'm trying to remember the source. I said that unions in the past have behaved like undertakers. They wait for the end of the policy to hit before they try to find a solution. What we are saying is that union bargaining should start right from national policies and sometimes even international policies, and using their global connections to do that. And sometimes it might even mean that working with employers association. So in Ghana, one of the construction unions, what it has done is to actually work together with employers association and try and enter into some bargaining arrangement with employers association. And it has used the facility within some of the procurement agreements that is talking about workers' rights, right? Okay, so if in applying for a state contract, if you can show that you are a member of this association, and this association allows informal workers to organize, then it pushes your mark up. You get the point. So what we are saying is that the whole bargaining terrain has to expand. But sometimes these unions also get overwhelmed, because all they have done is to wait and go and negotiate with the employer. But the question is, how do you build the skills, and how do you do it? And how do you work with other actors? And in Ghana, one of the actors that has been of great support to the unions has been the Third World Network, because then it also has provided them an understanding about if there's this policy, what does this mean? Even if there's this law, what does this
mean?
Right, ma'am. You have to unmute.
Yes. So thank you, ma'am, for this very informative and fruitful lecture. I think I need one or two clarifications. So my first question is that if you go for in the contemporary times, so not in India, most of this developing country, you find the informality is increasing. and the role of trade union is declining. Most of the cases, like so far my Indian experience is that most of the, after the technology, after AI, after this gig work that Surojit explained, so you find that technically term that we use, commodifications of these informal workers. So in that context, so what is your opinion in terms of Ghana or in terms of Africa with respect to the role of trade union to meet the requirement of these particularly informal workers? So this is the first questions that maybe this is one thing that you need to, this is my understanding. And the second questions related to the political factor, because most of the cases, because of this political dimensions, most of the power, the bargaining power is constantly declining. In Africa, India, all this, so far my understanding is that. So what is your opinion on this constant, particularly on the context of the political factor that you want? Then the third questions that I want to know, you are expert in that area. I know the situation in this, particularly the role of social media, or particularly the media. So I want to, in Indian context, so there is very, very little role with respect to this role of media in terms of the trade unions related to this informality. So what is your stand on that, this point, because you are handling on this? Yes, then maybe I will ask some other questions. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. In fact, I'll start from the last question, which is fresh in my mind, and the role of the media. So, of course, we have the traditional media and the new media. And one of the things I didn't add to the presentation was the source of their power. So when they've organized, what has been the source of their power. And you have different levels. And the media has been critical for them. And they said that, look, holding press conferences and talking about issues, really, this whole thing about naming and shaming. And so they are doing that. And now, in terms of new media also, you find out that those who are working more and more in the cloud space, the internet space platform workers, they are using that also to connect, because then they find out that they are isolated. But then they found out also that they could use the same platform that is isolating them to connect. And because they all have the skills, they are able to connect. And sometimes they can also bring up their issues using the new media, the social media. And some are finding TikTok also very important. So, and the point about naming and shaming, because then TikTok allows people who do not have any non-literate people, you know, and in their local language as well. But the use is isolated, because then, as we said also, it's also in terms of access to the facilities, access to a smartphone in order to be able to upload and connect, and who you are connecting with and all that. You know, but it holds potential, and some of the informal associations have used it to great effect. Sometimes even showing workplace abuses, you know, the construction workers, and then it gets picked up, and then it goes viral, and then the government has. So it does. The question is, so which leads the whole thing to the political actors. No, the political actors, they have their strengths and they have their weaknesses. So here I'm using political actors as to who support informal workers in engaging with powers that are compromising their working conditions. And so I mentioned this whole thing about faith-based, and unions had discovered that, like with domestic workers, they have to be taken out of the domestic space. Where do you put them? Unions don't have. And they discovered that when they work with faith-based organizations that really support them, then they can give them temporary assignment, especially with migrant domestic workers, and helping them, because sometimes then their passports have been seized, and so in between getting them to deal with their status, where do you keep them? And if you keep them in a faith-based institution, they are also protected against the domestic police services and all that. So these are some of the things, but sometimes also there are problems. So as I've said, it's been the context. We found out that it's been the context, and the same faith-based space also has been used a lot by domestic workers also, because then this is where the employers will allow their employees to come and worship. But then they can use that also if they have a good relation with the faith-based institutions, to use that as a space to talk about their working rights. But you need a faith-based institution that also believes that it's not just enough to protect their spirit, but you also want them to have working rights. I've mentioned NGOs. In fact, in India, our research found out that is a hybrid. So the hybrid about NGOs, what the NGOs have done have been to bring them around cooperatives and marketing cooperatives, input cooperatives, and all that. And then within that, get them to talk about other rights. So different political actors and different situations. But then when you're talking about disappearing jobs, how do these hybrid forms allow us to deal with a real issue, which is capital, which is pushing a certain form of work that makes unionization difficult and therefore demobilizes workers? And one of the positions about one of the academics who is looking at informality, Galen, is saying that, look, this whole thing about informality is about the return of capitalist work form to its default mode. What does he mean by this? What he's saying is that all the things that the trappings of formal work that we celebrate, standard employment relations, employment protection, collective bargaining, healthcare, transport care, education, pension, this has been as a result of the struggle of workers. It did not come with capitalist employment, formal employment. Now, what capital is doing is taking a different form through the, new forms of work, to push workers into that space where they can no longer organize, so that we can go to a return to the default mode. And this is some of the conversations we are having with trade unions, and that they need to rethink how they organize and how they engage with governments. But looking more and more also, not just national organizations, but also picking up higher on international discussion. I hope I have answered your question.
Yes. Yeah, thank you, ma'am. So can I ask some another questions? If other have ask questions, then I will ask some other questions. Yes.
Is there any other question?
Yes. Okay, so
Hello.
if there is no, yes.
Yes.
Hello. Good afternoon. Good evening to everyone. From this side, ma'am, I have a question. What is the access and benefit sharing the people get over there at Ghana? Like, if you are getting something like their turmeric or like any traditional knowledge of the peoples, then what the benefit those people are getting at those places. So in simple term, it means to say like what is the access and benefit sharing those people are getting from it.
Yeah, I'll need help. So when you are
Yes.
saying beneficiaries, what does it mean?
Yes, ma'am.
I'll need help with that question. The
Yes,
voice was a
Nisha.
bit faint. Yeah,
Nisha, can you please repeat your question once? Little slowly, maybe because of connectivity problem.
yeah.
Okay, okay, sir. Ma'am, I am asking the question is that what those people are getting the access and benefit sharing.
Access
Is
and
that my
benefit sharing.
Yeah.
yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So when you're talking
In
about,
the
yeah.
like in the biodiversity rule, it is also being a part of it that access and benefit sharing and constitution of the biodiversity community members. So, what the benefit those people are getting from that places or the knowledge they have been shared? That's my point of the question.
Yeah. So in terms of the access to resources, what are some of the benefits they get? That's what you mean. Yeah. And
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
yeah. So for some, it has been market access. For some also, it has been support to package their goods. For others, it has been access to a site to operate, because sometimes, the city comes and says that we need a site for this, and then this is where they are, and if they move, they are going to be issued. So the unions have helped them to protect the site and gain a title deed to the site, so nobody can come and move them. So for some, this has been. For others, it has been access to equipment, and the fact that they are led to banks, and the banks can give them a credit facility, and then they do group purchases and all that. For others, I mean, like in Ghana, the fishing, artisanal fishing, the government has had to provide them with a fuel, which is cheaper than the ordinary fuel. And so they work together as a group, and then it's allocated to them, and they do the sharing. So these are some of the benefits that they have. For others, it's even been a pension scheme. And let's talk about the pension scheme, and a discussion with the pension authorities as to how they can address their ways, their needs, because especially informal sector operators are saying that, how can I invest when money for the future when I retire, when I need to educate my child, and I feel that it's better that I educate my child who will earn income and take part of me. So building a facility into the pension scheme so that they can withdraw a certain amount also to feed into there. So these are some of the benefits, but the benefits are specific to specific contexts and specific situations. But in all this, being part of an association has been useful.
Subhashini, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, good evening, sir. Good evening, all. Thank you so much, ma'am, for this enlightenment session. And my inquiry is actually, I want to know in Ghana, what is the role of non-traditional platforms like NGOs, CSOs, and also the cooperatives regarding improving the bargaining power of um, informal workers, specifically in organized sectors?
Yeah. Yeah, indeed, they are different.
Recently,
They are different.
in Ghana.
Yeah. Yeah, indeed,
Yes,
they
yes.
are. Yeah, sorry. Are you
Thank
done,
you.
please? Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Are you done? Yeah, okay. Yeah, indeed, there are CSOs, there are NGOs that are offering all kinds of support, as I said. So and in fact, some of the trade unions are also organizing their members into cooperatives. And most of the time it's marketing cooperatives, and which marketing cooperatives allows them to get access to inputs. Okay, and the Agricultural Workers Union, for example, and then also organizing them around irrigation schemes and how to manage also, even in terms of managing water flow, how it's shared and all that. These are some of the things that are done. So you have a number, CSOs, some also do a bit about alternative skills, especially where the enterprise is seen as non-viable, and then again, access to credit and all that. But most of the time, it's also about policy engagement, giving them information for their negotiations, and sometimes also hiring lawyers to lead them also to take some of the cases to court, and that has been really useful. And building their negotiation skills, so some of the research I was doing, and one of the traders group, they said, well, when they went to meet with the local government officials, there was a bit of disdain, and these people, what are they up to? And they came themselves, and these are traders from the market. And they decided that they'll do their case. And the local government authorities, they were humbled. And another one was telling me, one of the trade union industrial relations officer was telling me about how he met one bank manager in town and said, hey, your woman came to visit me and they put their case, I'm going to give them the loan. So building their negotiation skills and having them to be independent, and they can independently take up this. So NGOs are doing a lot. CSOs are doing a lot, the cooperatives. However, the problem is when the NGOs become more and more service-oriented and not advocacy. So when they become service-oriented, then it becomes more and more of informal sector operators looking more to have their needs met and less of building the capacity to push for policy change.
Right, ma'am. Meenaketan ji, you
ma'am.
wanted to ask? No.
Yeah, so yes, ma'am, one thing I just want to your just guidance that you talk about that day by day because of this education system, education infrastructure, and because of different initiatives. So many programs are there. So the number of educated, particularly youth, is increasing, in India, in Ghana, all African countries. One, so in that context, so my question is that how to create the employment opportunity for this context of this youth in those who are entering to the labor market in Ghana or Africa or India, that maybe if your own experience. That is the first question. And the second question, that the way that that particularly I'm talking of the future of work, particularly when we have huge informal workers without skills. So in that context, so we are close to India, we have 92% working in the informal worker, most of the cases. So in that context, so how this, particularly the future of work is going to impact these informal sector workers in Ghana or in Africa or in India. So this is generally what is your stand on that?
Yeah, thanks. Let me say that my position is that these problems will exist insofar as our governments are leaving job creation to the private sector. So if you leave job creation to the private sector, then there's no way you can create jobs. If governments have their plans and programs, then they know that they are creating jobs. Because you see, if the private sector is the one creating jobs, the private sector is going to ride on reducing labor costs. So the private sector will do everything it can to ensure that it does not employ too many people. So that's where the problem is. For me, there's no way we can deal with youth unemployment without a revision of the economic structure. Yeah. And, increasingly people have spoken about the high levels of what do you call it, absence of formal education, and therefore low levels of skills, and how can they pick up and all that. And I'm discovering that in Ghana, for example, we have this apprenticeship system, and the apprenticeship system is for, so you have artisans that are repairing cars, that are building houses, technicians, what do you call it, masons, electricians, and all that. And most of the time, these are people who dropped out of school. And they are picking all their skills. And they are the people who are building our houses. And they are the people who are sitting by the roadside. And they are the ones that are helping people in the communities send money, mobile money, and they are the ones, and they are picking their skills. So it's not as if it's not possible to educate them. It is the absence of it is the direction of national policy that is creating the problem. And in order for policymakers to escape, what do you call it, to escape responsibility, what they say is that it is their fault. So now they're asking us in the universities to teach entrepreneurship and tell every young person leaving university that, look, if you have entrepreneurial skills, you can start up and you can be the next Steve Jobs or Microsoft. But we know it doesn't work out. It doesn't work that way. And the poor young people, when they cannot make it, then they begin to feel that they are the ones, it's because they are not entrepreneurial enough. But young people are entrepreneurial enough. In Ghana and also in India, I mean, all these street work, people are not waiting. They are creating their own jobs and they are making their own enterprises to earn income so they can have dignity. For me, it is national policy, which is complete mismatch. National policy, which is promoting the interests of capital and not promoting the interests of the citizens. Thank you.
So,
yeah.
One last question, sorry.
Okay.
One last question, yeah.
Okay.
So basically, the question is on this mining contest in Ghana that you are talking about, Wakam, on this contest. So can you elaborate, because most of the cases, if Ghana, so far, my understanding is that this illegal mining is increasing in these different parts of the country. So, and also there is huge displacement, there is issue of environmental concerns, issue of livelihood. So in that context, what is the role of this Wakam, particularly doing for the benefit of this on this particularly those who are these displaced people in Ghana in mining areas?
Yeah, let me say that I'm not in contact with Wakam now, but when I was in contact with Wakam at the time, let's say this would be about 3 years ago, Wakam was actually assisting communities confront formal mining, because there's a way in which, because of the scale of devastation of artisanal mining to our environment, we tend to think that, what do you call it, large-scale mining is less harmful. what happened to us in Ghana is that before structural adjustment, all mining was underground. Now, structural adjustment, they said that really because we are high risk and all that, we should encourage surface mining. And so then the government also decided that they will encourage artisanal mining, small scale mining, so communities, because people start asking the question, if you are going to allow foreigners to damage our environment and go away, why can't we also mine? So artisanal mining was being promoted also. But what has happened is that the state capacity to control artisanal mining has given up. And in the past also, because the technology that was being used was more manual, the scale was not that big. But here comes technology provided by Chinese. And so it has increased the scale and the rate of devastation and all that. And the state is almost powerless in dealing with it. But the state's powerlessness also was the fact that some politicians were complicit. Because in Ghana, there was a law that banned artisanal mining, all mining activities in forest reserves and at waterheads. The government came in and actually pushed a bill that reversed it. So now people are saying, let's go back to that bill. Okay, so the fact that there's also been a bit of political capture that has compromised the state's ability to deal with it. But that's not to say that when we're not doing artisanal mining. So we make a distinction between artisanal mining, which is legal, and then because when it's registered and it's legal, then you can deal with all the standards and all of that. What the government has also done is to set up a gold board and to ask that people sell their gold to the gold board. So if you're selling, you need a certificate to sell. And there's also a bit of clamp down and all that. We are hoping that we deal with some of these issues. Yeah. So thank you very much. And
Thank you, ma'am, for your.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm so grateful. Yeah. So see you in a bit in Kipos. And thanks for all those who came to listen to me. I'm so grateful.
Thank you very much. Thank you from the bottom of our heart. Under your extremely busy schedule, you have taken out time. And I know I have taken the advantage that we are visiting here at UCC and you were here, and your love and affection is always, touching us. So this lecture was extremely thought-provoking, and for Indian audience also, it would be extremely useful, as I was saying, that the situation is almost similar. So from your vast experience, whatever insights you have given, I think those who could not attend this live, they would be listening to the YouTube recordings, and they would think about it. And I think all of us would get benefited out of your talk. So thanks a lot, madam. Thank you. You are almost speaking for 2 hours now. You must be very tired. So we express our deep gratitude on behalf of Delhi Economic Society for your talk. Thank you, madam.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Thank you, all the participants. Thank you. We close the meeting now.
Thank you, ma'am. Namaste. Okay. Stop.